Kathy Gatton. I'm a Senior Project Manager with the IGES Institute. For those of you who may be familiar with IGES, or unfamiliar, with IGES, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background on the Institute. IGES was founded in 2001 as a 501c3 nonprofit. We're located on the campus of the George Washington University, Virginia Science and Technology campus in Ashburn, Virginia. The IGES Institute unites private and public sectors to improve mission-critical information sharing and safeguarding for those who protect and serve our communities in justice, public safety, and homeland security. The IGES Institute has grown to over 380 member companies and individual associates that represent government, nonprofit, and educational institutions from across the United States. IGES provides training, technical assistance, national scope issue management, and program management services for the purpose of realizing the power of information sharing. For today's webinar, as we have several speakers, so as the speakers address their individual segments, which will be on the history of the document and the approach and plan going forward, there are a couple of points where they will allow opportunities for question and answer. So if you will, please submit any questions that you have using the question feature on the webinar screen. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Fred Roselle. Fred chairs the IGES Correction Advisory Committee. Fred?
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. First off, on behalf of the IGES Correction Committee, I appreciate your participation. We'll talk about that a little bit later, John Daughtry and John Ward, but we have a significant number of folks participating and a lot of interest, and we're very proud of that. Briefly, the IGES Corrections Committee is comprised of partners, business partners, practitioners from around the country, and we work to support the mission of IGES, which is the information sharing. In this particular case, as a Corrections Advisory Committee, we primarily focus in the area of corrections, of course, because that's our industry. In that vein, this project that you're participating in today is one of our three major focuses for 2015 for the Advisory Committee. As we get into more details, you're going to find that this is a very critical endeavor. So again, I appreciate your participation, but let me mention that the output and the final outcome will have a lot of impact and potential value to a lot of different people, both on the industry side as solution providers and also on the agency side at a number of different levels from the standpoint for practitioners and those seeking support and additional solutions from providers throughout the country. I want to mention there was a comment early on the difference between practitioner. In this particular case, I'm defining a practitioner as an individual typically employed by some government agency and actually working in a corrections field, parole, probation, jails, prisons, etc. Solution provider or business partner would be a company that is assisting government agencies in solutions and solving issues revolving around IT and information sharing. I'd like to thank John Ward, who's our subcommittee chair, for accepting the responsibility for this major initiative. It's going to be very time-consuming, complex, a lot of moving parts and coordination. And along with John Daughtry with CTA, we appreciate the collaborative effort in being able to work with CTA to make this a successful endeavor. I can't overstate again how critical this is going to be and what your final product is going to be. It's going to have a value for a number of years and for a number of people. So I won't belabor that point, but thank you again for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to John Ward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Yeah, just along the lines of Fred's comments about corrections practitioner, I qualify in that regard. I was involved with CTA's effort to initially write these standards back in the early 2000s. John Daughtry will give us some more details on the history coming up here shortly. But definitely in my current engagement out in California, implementing their offender management system, we're using this document on a regular basis. So I'm definitely bought into the need, the value of this document, and recognize that it's relevant to all of you out there. With that, let me just hand over to John Doherty with Montana Department of Corrections.
Thanks, John. And this is John Doherty. I'm with, as John just said, with the Montana Department of Corrections. I'm the CIO here. I'm also on the executive board of the Corrections Technology Association and have been so for just over 10 years now. And I am also serve on the IGES Corrections Advisory Committee that Fred is managing that's working on this project. You want to switch to the next slide, Don? Please. I worked in the field of corrections since 1998. Started off as a network technician and moved my way up, and I've been involved with standards for quite some time within that career. In the early 2000s, the Corrections Technology Association was looking for a grant to help put together some type of standards document to help agencies across the country that were in the process of developing an offender management system. They were looking to purchase a new offender management system or just make enhancements and really get into the world of sharing data with other states and other agencies to develop standards and what they call the common business functions, and look at what was common between states when we were looking at an offender management system. We were able to get a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we partnered with ASCA to help us manage that grant. We hired URL integrators or integration to help us do the documentation. They are the ones that actually provided the final documentation and really helped us with all the heavy lifting when it came to documenting. The leaders of this project were the Utah Department of Corrections under the CIO Galen DeLand, and Carol Maraji, who I believe at that time was the CIO of Washington State Corrections. She did work in corrections in California in that time period too, but I think she was in Washington when this project was started. As John Ward said, he was the CIO in South Carolina, and I was a CIO here in Montana. We were both very involved with this. Scott McPherson, who's the CIO of the state legislature in Florida now, was over top of he was the CIO of corrections in Florida, and he was very involved. A large number of states spent a lot of time trying to put this information together. You will see that it is really geared more towards secure care for an OMS rather than community corrections. That was kind of a limitation of the grant and as well as a limitation of the time. So while there is a little bit in here about community supervision, this is an area that the document is pretty weak. One nice thing about the document, it has been utilized a lot. I've talked with a lot of the commercial OMS vendors that have used this document or do continue to use this document or reference it. I've talked with a number of other states that do the same, including my own state. About 6 months ago, I was talking with IT staff in another state that was in the process of looking for procurement, and they were asking me questions about the document, and were interested in any updates we may want to do. They felt it was very beneficial, but we're hoping there was just a little bit more. And that's where John will get into here in a minute. I do want to say the CTA board, we've talked about this at our board meetings. Ever since IGES and the Corrections Advisory Committee proposed moving forward with this, and the CTA board is fully behind this project and want to get our membership involved as much as possible too. So we do appreciate everybody that's on the call and moving forward with this. So I'm going to turn it back over to John, who's going to talk about the project's charter and really what direction we want to go with updating this document.
Right. Okay. Thanks, John. Yeah, just to substantiate John's statement about how the document has been used, I too, I was previously with South Carolina Department of Corrections as a CIO there, and then I transferred over and working with HP now here in California. But over the years since I've left South Carolina, I've seen a number of RFPs come out where I can see that the states have used this document to define requirements, functional requirements. I've seen vendor products now referencing it, referencing the CTA standards. And here in California, as I said earlier, as we roll out additional functionality, we routinely map it against, map the functionality against the CTA standards document. So it's a vital document that is widely used. So I guess you might ask the question, why would we update it now? It was published back in 2004. I think really for the document to remain vital, I think it needs to be updated to account for the many changes that have taken place in the corrections and the industry overall. You know, I've listed some in this slide. Oh, Don, if you could advance to the next slide. Oh, one too many. Back to slide 3. Yeah, so on this slide, I'm laying out some of the rationale, the factors that are causing us to consider updating the document at this time. And first, the evolving body of knowledge in corrections. I've listed some of these standards that have come about since the document was published back in 2004. So National Information Exchange Model, of course, the performance-based measures from ASCA, APPA, the Association of Parole and Probation Administrators. This organization has published some documents that are related to, relevant with the CTA standards document, as well as other materials from IGES and other sources. So, just basically this evolving body of knowledge means that we should update the CTA standards right now. We also need to reflect the new technologies that were not around back in 2004. I've listed some examples there, not an exhaustive list, but mobility is becoming more widely used. Mobile probation officers, mobility kiosks, GPS tracking, use of video. These are all technologies that are becoming more and more common. Certainly were not around in 2004. So, we'd want to update the document to reflect these technologies to the extent that they are becoming standards. New mandates, changing policies. I've listed examples there too. I think you all have seen that through the past 10 years and how that has affected your offender management systems, how you needed to adapt your systems to accommodate these changing policies. Operational approaches. I think just if you look back back in 2004, more than 10 years ago, it was not that common for states and counties to outsource functions, but today that is becoming more common to outsource components. For example, the inmate messaging or the canteen operations or other healthcare services or even across the board outsourcing. So this is of course impacts how technology is used and the standard use of technology. Evidence-based practices is another trend that we see where the systems we need to be able to use the systems to show that the outcomes we're achieving the outcomes and aligning cost expenditures with the outcome. And perhaps the biggest factor here, I think, to be called out is the increased need for integration. Integrated justice is a driving force today that back in 2004 that term was just being coined. Information sharing today is far more relevant and necessary, and it's becoming a standard, a requirement, actually. So the document from 2004, of course, doesn't reference these factors at all, and I think that this is an opportunity for us to consider these factors with our update. At this point, maybe I might ask Kathy if any comments have come in, and again, just remind you all, the attendees, if you have any comments or have input, suggestions, feel free to email those or to use the submit button there on the webinar, and then that would give us an opportunity to respond to any of those questions or comments. So, Kathy, any? Yep.
Sorry if we don't have any questions at this time, and I know you mentioned that if we do have questions following the webinar that you can do a follow-up response to them also. So, but again, as John said, just if you have anything, just to go ahead and submit to the webinar screen. Thanks.
Yeah, it would have been ideal to make this an interactive session, of course, but we have some 40 or 50 callers, so not really easy to do that. But we'd look for your input and comments through the webinar submit button. So Don, let's move on to slide 4 then. Continuing on with the project charter. And again, we had emailed out the project charter, basically, our rationale, our timeline, our approach for updating the CTA business functions document. So this slide shows our time frame, our goals for getting this done. Our primary goal is that at the CTA conference in June, that we'll have a workshop that ideally will be pretty far along with making some updates to the document at that point. But certainly it'll be a work session. We'll be able to discuss amongst CTA attendees the updates and perhaps consider additional additions at that time. But our real goal here is to get to a point where we have a document that is pretty well fleshed out at that point. So we've broken the project down into 3 phases, and we're in the first phase now, of course, with defining the objectives. So what are the goals for the revision? To craft an outline by late February to have a solid outline of changes that we want to make to the document. And so we'd like input from folks on suggestions, areas where we need to update the document. And then starting in early March, we'll get into more of a writing phase. We're going to be looking for volunteers to own different bits, parts of the updates, and we'll be having conference calls and so forth to try to get to an initial draft in late April. The month of May will be spent mainly doing peer reviews and editing and continued writing, I'm sure, but again, pointing toward a workshop in early June at the CTA conference. Don, maybe the next slide, Don, please. So continuing with the project charter, again, the document that we emailed out did identify some of the objectives, but these are really came about from discussions amongst the IGES Corrections Committee and various one-off discussions, I suppose. So I've assembled what I've heard to date into this slide and thoughts that I have about, what are the objectives for updating the document. So let me just walk through these kind of real quickly. The number 1, again, the document will continue to serve as a functional guideline for states to procure and counties to procure JMS and OMS solutions, and as well for vendors to fine-tune their product and to market their products. So it's kind of a communications method for both states and private sector to communicate. And along those lines, standardizing terminology. So the document, I think, does a pretty good job of defining business functions and using terminology that I see that states and business partners are now turning to the document to use and using the terminology that's referenced in the document. So business functions, entities, processes, actors, these are all in the document today. If you look at the CTA standards document, it's like a 500-page document. There, for the 17 business functions, we have the UML activity diagrams and a fair amount of process material. But certainly it is a business-focused document. So we do intend to keep it that way. This will not be a technical standard as much as a business focused standards document. And then the third thing I've listed here, define the core and ancillary functions. So the document today defines the 17, what I'm calling core business functions in corrections. But certainly there's a whole host of other functions that I'm referring to as ancillary, but my thinking here is that we can use this document to help agencies and firms to define the scope of projects. This is useful to say, well, this is the scope of the core business functions, and these other ancillary functions are not core, but they're perhaps optional. So as states contemplate updating or replacing their offender management systems, they would see the core things as being must-have and the ancillary being maybe, perhaps we should include these. Today we don't have any concept of ancillary functions in the document, so this would be new work to take on as part of this update. The fourth item here, promulgate existing reporting and integration standards, kind of goes back to the factor that I mentioned originally with the evolution of standards in the past 10 years. And so certainly this document with IGES's support, their interest, of course, is to further the use of standards and to solidify standards across the corrections domain. I guess specifically this effort is very important from an industry perspective because you know, the industry needs to consider this document in how information will be shared in the context of how business functions and standards are used. So, and from a state perspective, how they procure, how states procure offender management systems, you know, using this document will help, I think, align states to national standards. So that's our goal. That's, again, something that the existing version of the document does not contemplate at all, but we would hope that we would be able to bring this into the document. And then fifth, as I mentioned earlier, the more recent technologies. Just to caveat this a bit, this would not be a place where we would list the fringe technologies as much as, you know, the late breaking. That's not really the purpose of this document. This document is more for practitioners to use as a reference for what are the ubiquitous technologies, what are the technologies that are really widely used, so that in making decisions about funding and priorities, it's kind of a reference point to say, well, you know, other states are very widely using video, but we're not. And so, again, you know, the standard use of technology is what we would want to incorporate into this document if we can manage. Fred mentioned at the beginning of the session that this is a collaboration between government folks, you know, agencies, IT people, business analysts, folks who work for government, as well as the private sector firms, so people, companies that have products. This is a collaboration. In this call already, I think we have a pretty much 50-50 mix between the two. And we want to maintain that balance. We don't want this to be an effort that's just led by and pretty much only the private sector or only the government. This is definitely a collaboration, and that again is consistent with IGES, the IGES charter. I mentioned, or Fred mentioned practitioners, and certainly this effort, we're looking for input from anyone that has detailed business knowledge and experience in the corrections domain. So that is what we're considering, a corrections practitioner. Okay, well, I think that's my comments about the objectives. Again, that's our first phase of the project. If there were any comments that have come in, Kathy, anything to mention?
Yes, John, we had a couple of things, one question and one comment. There was a question about, will a copy of the presentation be sent to attendees? We wanted everyone to know that there will be a webinar recording of the presentation that will be posted on the IGES website. That website is www.iges.org. Also, there's a comment that says the new version of the document should include a pre-sentence component, if you want to speak to that. And that's what we have at the moment, John.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. And really now we're going to begin the discussion, I guess. Again, this is what I've pulled together just from discussions in the Corrections Committee within IGES, some conversations that have taken place about what are potential additions and revisions to the document. So this is kind of where we're at right now, maybe a straw man perhaps. Certainly we need to get some more input and make some decisions on whether we can do these. I mean, we don't, you know, perhaps this is more of a shopping list, wish list. We might not be able to get all this incorporated into the document, but that's kind of where we're at, I think, at this stage, so we're looking for input. But the first one that is evident to me anyway is that the existing document doesn't really have an executive summary. It's a 500-page document that's a little bit unwieldy for someone to just grab and start using. So the first course of action, I think, is going to, or definitely a change that we'll make, an addition we'll make, is to write an executive summary. It sets a context for how the document should be used. And I think part of that executive summary, or perhaps maybe an addendum, would be some cross-references to related materials. So I mentioned the APPA document is a really well-done document that describes processes for, or an approach for procuring a community corrections-based system. Very related and somewhat overlapping with what we have here. So I think we'll want to reference to it and leverage it to the extent we can. Some of the standards documents that I mentioned earlier, I think we would want to reference, have links to those documents. So those are the first two potential additions that I think would be very likely that we'll take up. The next one, we did receive a suggestion that in the 17 core functional areas that we relate those to the standard performance measures that ASCA has put forward. So, you know, the standard, if all of you are familiar with PDMS, if you're not, that would be a good thing for you to become familiar with, because it's intended as a common approach for reporting key performance measures in corrections, and such as use of force or incidents, contraband, and, you know, exactly what constitutes an escape, you know, setting some definitions around the measures and how they're measured and how they're reported. So, this was one suggestion that we received, was that we should incorporate PDMS, you know, these standard performance measures, into this document. And the fourth item here, so assessing the functional areas. So as John mentioned, there's 17 functional areas there today. I think, you know, we're going to want to look at those. Are they complete? Are we missing any? What about the format, how they're organized? Do we contemplate making changes there? Or if you look at any of if you drill down into any of these 17 functions, are the processes pretty well defined? Are they clear? Is there any work we should do in there at that level? So that's more of the going deepening it, as opposed to taking it wider. I think my thought here is that we would be more inclined to widen the document as opposed to taking it deeper. But I'm looking for input from folks on whether there's agreement with that approach. As John mentioned, community corrections it's very light in the document today. To what extent should we increase or broaden the community corrections functionality? I think that would certainly be helpful, but then again, I think we want to leverage the APPA material, so that would be an area of additions to this document. John also, I think, mentioned that the document, the CTA standards, are very much focused on state prison operations as opposed to jail. So to what extent do we want to add to this document to accommodate those functions that are unique to jails, but still standard across all jails? I think that would be a great thing to do. I'm not, you know, I think though we would need to have proper like I wouldn't be the guy that would be able to do much of that, but I think we do have some folks on the line that may be able to step forward and help to broaden to include jail functions. And then the next thing, I did mention the ancillary functions. So the things I'm thinking of there, you know, pre-trial, yes, that's perhaps more of a jail concept, but, you know, there are some standard functions surrounding pre-trial, and, you know, victim notification, I think, is very widely safe to say that's a standard business function in corrections, and it's not referenced in the document today. Reentry, so these are all what I'm not considering core, but they are ancillary. They're so common that they should be referenced here. You know, reentry, healthcare actually is one that's mentioned as a core. Inmate communications is not. So there's many others that I think that in this effort we should identify. The first step is to identify what they are and then whether we should try to incorporate these changes into the document. Moving on to slide 7 then is just really continuation of potential additions and revisions. So, you know, as you see, I've come up with 8 so far. We've assembled 8 different items for potential addition or revision. So number 5 here is identifying common data exchanges. So again, there's a wealth of material out there that document IEPD, standard information exchange packages, that are in use in corrections. I think perhaps what we could do in the CTA standards document is to identify those, the subset of those that are really widely used or used routinely in corrections, and reference and link out to the technical details that are available in the global documents. Number 6, define relationship between functional areas. So this was a comment that I did receive from one of the corrections committee members, was that the functional areas, the 17 functional areas in the CTA standards document are not, there's no connection between them. They're almost like siloed. And of course, we all know that's not the case in the way these systems are built. And so the notion was that perhaps our CTA standards document could cross-reference or identify dependencies and touch points between the functional areas. Number 7, again, this is this would be a big challenge, a big effort, would be to think through the security implications of these various functional areas and the information governance aspect. So we have these 17 functional areas. Well, so what are the security concerns? Certainly with healthcare, those are pretty well understood. But when you get into things like victim management, with crime, offense data, defining the data, classifying the data, I guess, whether we could take this effort on as part of this update. Again, that would be a tough one to tackle, but I think it would be valuable if we could manage it. And then the 8th one that I've listed here, again, when you look at the document, the UML diagrams that are in there, it references actors, but there is no real kind of inventory, a list of here's all of the actors and the roles. So this, again, speaking from my experience, that is typically a challenge when you implement an offender management system, trying to figure out who should have access to what. Granted, it will differ from state to state, but I would suggest that there's enough similarity that it might be possible to put forward a template, a standard that states could work from in defining who has access to what and what are the roles, update versus read, so forth. So that's kind of the straw man, a list of potential additions and revisions that we've accumulated thus far. Again, we'll be looking for input on these, and with that, I don't know, is there any input thus far? Kathy, anyone out there suggesting some areas that we could consider?
We have a couple of new comments, John, and suggestions. One would be to possibly cross-reference to the performance-based measuring system standards. And we also have a second one, which would be to suggest addressing staff officer communications within a facility.
Right, yep, definitely. I think staff officer communications, my experience is that's certainly a standard core function. Agree. And I'm sorry, what was the first one, Kathy? I didn't catch it.
It was to possibly cross-reference to the performance-based measuring system standards, the PDMS.
Right. Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah, let's advance forward to the next slide then. Don, slide 8. So again, we're in the very beginning stage of this effort, and very much need input from the corrections practitioners that are on this call and others. So actually, I would invite you to share this information with your staff, your team, your business analysts, or your subject matter experts that you work with. Solicit their input and use the document. If you've not ever looked at it or used it, take a look at it. I think it is valuable for you to consider using. But we're looking for your input. First, goals. Are there some other potential uses that we should consider? Is there other aspects to the document that we could change that would make it more valuable, more widely used? We're looking for your thoughts and suggestions on that. Again, the links to materials. So if you're aware of other materials that you think would be logical to link to from the CTA standards document, make us aware of those. We'll be doing some research on that in the next few weeks, but looking for input on that. On the issue of what topic, the functional areas, of course, this is a key area that we need input. We've already received some in this call, but we'll be looking for input that's emailed to me, and I'll share it out through email. We will be figuring out a collaboration approach for how, once we kind of get some volunteers stepping up and how we'll share materials and so forth. We don't really have that in place yet. But at this stage, if you do have some ideas about what topics should be added or maybe functional areas that are missing or need to be restated or reorganized, please send those suggestions. And as I said, changes, revisions to the existing content. If you think of ways that perhaps the document should be restructured, format changes, whatever, just provide those suggestions. And some feedback on what we presented here too. So the changes and additions that we've come up with thus far, whether you agree or disagree, or you think you have some other ways that maybe we might approach to get to the same goal. And then finally, of course, we're going to be seeking volunteers. This was back when it first was done. It was very much a collaborative effort. I think there was input from dozens of different jurisdictions, states, and counties to some extent. So we want to reach out to the community of people that have experience as practitioners, and we desperately need that input. So if you'd like to volunteer for writing assignments, please do so. But I'll probably be reaching out again as we get further along with the outline. So yeah, the final slide then. Let's move to slide 9. So our next steps, as I mentioned, I'm looking forward to receiving input from the people on this call as well as from the IGES committee, and we'll update the goals that I've set forth in this presentation and that are in the project charter. So I will make updates to the goals and circulate that for review. We'll do that by the end of the month. And then also I will be creating an outline for the revised version. So again, look forward to receiving some input from others on areas to be added, to be changed, and so forth, and to incorporate that into an initial outline for what the revised version would look like. So again, end of this month is my target for getting that out to folks for a review, and we'll have another conference call in early February to present that out and seek feedback. And once we firm up the outline, then at that point is when we will try to get some volunteers and designate some writing assignments and put people on the spot to get some work done in a short period of time. But that really will be taking place in the month of February. And we'll also schedule some follow-up calls ongoing recurring calls as we go. So just back to the project charter, I did try to identify the expected time commitment that volunteers would might encounter in volunteering. So of course that's widely variable depending upon what it is you're volunteering for. But again, encourage you to get involved and take a hand in shaping the update of this document. So with that, I think we've covered the material I had in the presentation. Any other comments coming in? Kathy?
Not at this time. Well, we do have one other one that just popped up. Sorry, John. One was to include functional areas to document cell searches, custody post chronological logs, and to document staff security checks. Great.
Right. Okay. Very good input. Thank you.
And John, if you'd like, we have a few minutes still remaining. If you'd like to open this up to suggestions or comments or discussions, we certainly can do that.
Okay. Yes. Anyone out there with a burning question or suggestion or idea?
Okay, and for those who are in our audience, if you don't want to talk or you have any background noise or anything like that, you might want to mute your phone. Seeing everyone at this point.
Credential validation that's gone on as part of that process. So just assuming it's a public.
So we're getting a little bit of feedback. So any comments or suggestions from anyone that would like to address, they'd like to address to our have a radio.
Yeah, and that's exactly that. So we can at least keep a dialogue. It's less important to know exactly who.
Chris, you are on the speaker, so if you want to mute your phone, I believe that's you. Okay. Okay, John. I think that we had unmuted everyone. So if you had any other additional comments or final comments? John Ward? Okay, John Doherty, do you have any final comments? I know that we do have one additional question. John Ward or John Doherty, they want to know if they could send their name to you as a volunteer for this effort. There are some people that are interested in helping with this document. For those of you who have mentioned that you are interested in volunteering, John Ward's address is displayed on the screen. It's john.ward2@hp.com. We also have another question. What type of functional requirements? Example would be records, or what type of access that users would need, the security issue. Is this what would be included in this document that you're referencing? Okay, it looks like we have received all the questions, and I know there are people that have volunteered again to participate in this effort. So again, if you will, contact John Ward, his email address, jot down his email address while we're on here. There is going to be a copy of this presentation posted on the IGES website. I want to mention that again. It's www.igis.org. And so we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and give a special thanks to our presenters, Fred Roselle, who's chair of, again, of our Corrections Advisory Committee, and John Doherty, who is a Correction Technology Association CTA board member and the CIO for the Montana Department of Correction, and also to our subcommittee chair for this effort, John Ward. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you for participating in the webinar.